There's a second speaker. The thing's not over yet. We're going to have a Q&A as well with Mario. But there's another sort of human rights situation that's been going on in Haiti that you might be aware of. Professor Melanie Newton, who's an associate professor of history here at the University of Toronto. She's also the director of the Caribbean Studies program. She's going to sort of enlighten us about the situation that's going on right now in the Dominican Republic in regards to people of Haitian descent. You might have heard about that. An estimated 300,000 people are being stripped of their nationality, essentially being turned into stateless people. So that's been going on right now, so you can imagine the sort of impact that that's going to have. But we asked Professor Newton to come and address you because she's specializes in the social and cultural history of the Caribbean and the Atlantic world. So I'm just going to sort of hand over the microphone to her so she could let you know sort of about the situation that's going on right now in regards to people of Haitian descent in the Dominican Republic. Do you want this microphone?
I'll just take it.
Okay, hello. Hi. Okay, I'll try to be brief because I imagine you'll have questions. So I'm actually going to, this is a paper actually that I wrote in November in response to several events, legal events that took place in the Caribbean in late 2013, among them the ruling in the Dominican Republic, which I'm going to talk about. It's actually one of 3 different legal rulings that I'm going to talk about here in my presentation, in terms of thinking about what the implications are for Haiti. So my presentation is not actually specifically necessarily about Canada's relationship with Haiti. I do think that it is extremely important here in the Canadian context. Obviously, we want to be critical and conscientious citizens of the government under which we live, but I do think it's important to really think about why our conversations about Haiti always taken completely out of the regional context in which Haiti actually exists. What is Haiti's relationship with its neighbors? Why is that relationship with its neighbors not a strong one? And I think that is very much a part, Haiti's potential regional implications are very much a part of what motivates Western policy in Haiti. So that's the context of what I'm going to talk about. So, so in September, this is something else that you may not have, I don't know how many of you were aware of this, but in September, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves, informed the United Nations General Assembly, he was speaking at the UN General Assembly, that the Caribbean community, so this is a 14-member organization that includes Haiti, so I'm just going to call it CARICOM from here on in. So CARICOM intended to seek reparations from several European governments for the slave trade. That same week, there was a ruling of the Dominican Republic Constitutional Court which stripped thousands of Haitian Dominicans of citizenship, and the upward estimates, I think, were about 300,000 people who have been stripped of their citizenship. So I just want to reflect briefly on how these decisions range across sort of space and time in the Caribbean context, but really intertwine in terms of what they mean for one country, which is Haiti, and really exploring these announcements from the vantage point of what they mean for Haiti also illustrate how the unresolved injustices of the past continue to echo in the present and to compromise struggles for freedom and for justice in the present. So there's I don't know how many of you have seen Raoul Peck's film, Reduction of Statelessness from 2009. So there's a scene in that movie where there's a street vendor who's imagining, it's a very complicated film, but there's a street vendor who's imagining the conversations between the French and the Haitian governments negotiating over reparations for the 1825 indemnity payment, which the government of Jean-Pierre Boyer paid to France. So Boyer's payment, which I'm sure you all know something about, ended up being a deal with the devil because it sent the country into a spiral of state rapaciousness and impoverishment. So in reference to the 2003 campaign of the Aristide government to get France to repay the money, Peck's street vendor in this film enacts the film's fictional president, a fellow by the name of Jean de Théogène, demanding a precise figure, and the estimate in 2003 of what France owed Haiti was $21,685,135,571.48. So after many refusals, the French government relents and agrees to pay it back, except for the 48 cents. And in the movie, aghast, the street vendor says that Theo John cries out, "But what will be left for the Haitian people?" Now, there's been a lot of debate about this film. It's been criticized for, I quote, ridiculing the perfectly reasonable, legally sound, and widely hailed call for reparations. But I want to bypass the debate about Peck's motivations, which I cannot claim to know, and offer a different reading of why that joke might be significant. Because the film never says that reparations were unwarranted. What the joke raises doubts about was whether or not the millions of Haitians who should benefit from reparations would ever receive the money or have a say in how it was spent. So the film's foray into the debate about reparations opens up, I think, a really important point of conversation about reparations and a chance to think about Haiti's historic place in the Caribbean, as well as the role that national governments in the Caribbean play in efforts to address living histories of unfree migration and forced labor. So I don't know how many of you know about CARICOM's reparations case. Have you heard about this? So for those of you who don't, so CARICOM retained the British law firm Lee Day & Co. To represent it in a reparations lawsuit against the governments of Britain, France, and the Netherlands. And Lee Day & Co. is the law firm that also represented survivors of the British suppression of the Momo insurgency against the British government. And they forced the British government to settle. Historian Hilary Beckles, who's a leading historian in the Caribbean, and he leads CARICOM's Reparations Commission. And then there's Maureen Shepherd, another historian, who's the chair of Jamaica's National Reparations Commission, and they worked closely with CARICOM in moving this legal challenge forward. And Maureen Shepherd has noted that the demands for reparations are not, and I quote, about money. We want to create compensation mechanisms that would contribute to the development of the claimant states, end quote. She makes it clear that reparations should include an apology for the slave trade, investment in development infrastructure, and serious efforts to end racism. So CARICOM's demand for reparations for the Atlantic slave trade is legally distinct, obviously, from Atistide's campaign to have the 1825 indemnity repaid, the one I mentioned before. But the historical connection is quite obvious, and the British response to the 2013 announcement from CARICOM was quite similar to that of their counterparts from France in 2003 when Aristide made the same demand. At that time, French President Jacques Chirac warned that, I quote, "Before bringing up claims of this nature, I cannot stress enough to the authorities of Haiti the need to be very vigilant about, how should I say, the nature of their actions and their regime," end quote. So shortly after these threatening words, a joint French, American, and Canadian military force removed Aristide from office and ended Haiti's official campaign for reparations. 10 years on, the British government is equally adamant that it is not responsible for injustices from the colonial era. In a recent editorial, The Economist echoed the UK government's views and noted that, I quote, "Many former slave colonies in the Caribbean are now fairly successful middle-income countries or better." And they described the Bahamas and Barbados as having high GDPs, while Guyana and Jamaica are less prosperous, but only Haiti ranks among the world's poorest. Any assistance to the region should be carefully targeted and should surely stem from today's needs, not the wrongs of the past. So this discursive reinvention of reparations as assistance was also evident in Chirac's 2003 comment that while he felt sympathy for Haiti, France had already provided the country with sufficient aid. So this implies that Western aid to independent Caribbean states cancels out any obligations for past colonial injustices. Reparations opponents also argue that the legal expiration date has passed because there are no survivors or perpetrators who can be brought to court for slavery and the slave trade. Furthermore, according to The Economist, few of history's great wrongs have been smoothed over with cash. So such rhetorical strategies reduce reparations demands to a banal legal claim for damages, which Maureen Shepherd's words that I quoted earlier clearly illustrate is a deliberate misinterpretation. The Economist also suggests that even today's needs, quote unquote, are not enough to justify reparations. Those governments who would spend reparations money responsibly do not need it, while those who need it have demonstrated that they cannot spend money responsibly. So careful targeting, to quote The Economist, would be necessary to ensure that reparations were properly administered. And I think we can interpret careful targeting as tutelage and oversight from those who would pay the money. And it's precisely this situation of imperial tutelage where Haiti now finds itself. The 2004 coup was followed by military occupation under the direction of the United Nations, consequences of which we've just heard eloquently discussed. And MINUSTA has been actively suppressed Haiti's popular democratic movement. In the wake of the 2010 earthquake, an interim reconstruction commission, ostensibly directed by the Haitian government but really controlled by Bill Clinton, and including Haitian members whose views were mostly ignored, oversaw rebuilding, such as took place, for 2 years. The government of Michel Martelly legitimizes a system which privileges foreign investment, and we've heard some very specific examples of this, and strategic interests over democracy. So the 2010 earthquake and the ongoing tragedies of internal displacement and cholera testified to the failure of Haiti's occupation regime. Thousands of Haitians flee across the border and risk a dangerous and debased existence as effectively indentured workers in the Dominican Republic. On September 25th, the Dominican Constitutional Court ruled that anyone born on Dominican soil since 1929 of Haitian parents who were both undocumented migrants, any such person was no longer automatically a Dominican citizen. And this followed a number of rulings since the mid-2000s that have progressively limited people's ability, people of Haitian ancestry's ability to validate their citizenship. So these people must now apply for citizenship, and they might be turned down. The ruling is the latest in a series of new citizenship and immigration rules that discriminate against Haitian migrants and Dominicans of Haitian ancestry. The Dominican military has increased militarization of the border and claims that it has deported at least 68,000 Haitians caught entering the Dominican Republic illegally since 2011. So in the words of one woman, Epifania Sacha, who has lost her Dominican citizenship, I'm just quoting her, "My father arrived here in 1963 from Haiti, and my mother in 1970. They worked hard all their lives in the cane fields. All their children were born here. A few weeks ago, I presented my newborn daughter for a birth certificate, and they said they could not give it to me because my identity had to be revalidated. They tell you to your face that you are not Dominican, and that hurts a lot because I was born here, and because they're stealing the rights also of my daughters." And someone described to me the Dominican Republic must be one of the only countries in the world where a birth certificate expires. It's not a permanent legal document. So the moment of, I guess, citizenship is when you get your identity card, I think at age 16. And they've used that discrepancy in Dominican citizenship laws to effectively strip people of their citizenship, that their birth certificates are no longer valid, and they must now apply for their identity cards. So the ruling exempts people born before 1929, because 1930 was a year that certain new citizenship laws, which have now been overturned, I think, came into effect. And it was also the year before the official ascent to power of dictator Rafael Trujillo, who ordered the massacre of up to 20,000 Dominican citizens and residents of Haitian ancestry. So precisely the same group of people who are now being targeted by this legislation. So the Dominican Republic is not a member of CARICOM, but CARICOM and the Dominican Republic have signed a free trade agreement. They have one since the year 2000. And CARICOM and the Dominican Republic is a member of the Caribbean group, the Forum of the Caribbean Group of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, or CARIFORUM. So this is made up of CARICOM's 15 members plus the Dominican Republic. CARICOM initially responded very cautiously, expressing concern that the ruling would render as many as 210,000 people stateless. So very cautious, but it stopped short initially of calling the people who were affected Dominicans, or actually condemning the ruling as a human rights violation. Its stance has become progressively stronger under the leadership, particularly of the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves. But CARICOM's intervention in this issue is really no substitute for a clear position on the situation of Haitian migrant workers in the Dominican Republic, or the situation in Haiti that is leading people into such work. Since Haiti joined CARICOM in 2002, the closest that CARICOM has come to taking any kind of bold pro-human rights stance on any matter to do with Haiti and its diaspora was a tepid effort to broker a deal between Aristide and his opponents in the run-up to the 2004 coup. And when their efforts were not successful, they immediately backed away. After the 2010 earthquake, most CARICOM states sent relief supplies and personnel to Haiti. Despite promises, however, no coordination or support was forthcoming from the CARICOM Secretariat for these efforts, and they proved too costly for individual countries to maintain on their own. Since the Haitian Revolution, the United States and France have sought to isolate Haiti from the rest of the Caribbean in order to delegitimize revolution as an option for other Caribbean societies. Haiti is the only CARICOM member that officially reports no trade at all within CARICOM, a reflection of the country's unofficial economic status as a U.S. satellite. However, the sporadic quality of CARICOM's engagement with Haiti reflects a much deeper fragmentation. Caribbean politicians do not seem to see strategic or economic value in doing the sustained diplomatic work necessary to gain any real understanding of Haiti's complicated political landscape. And this raises the third significant legal development that took place in the CARICOM region in late 2013, one which probably didn't surface as news here, but is quite significant. So in late 2013, the Caribbean Court of Justice ruled in October of 2013 in the case of a Jamaican woman named Shanique Myrie. So Shanique Myrie was humiliated by customs officials in Barbados in 2011. So they strip searched her and cavity searched her on the suspicion that she was illegally trying to enter the country. And then they sent her back to Jamaica without allowing her to enter Barbados. And she took the government to court, arguing that Barbadian authorities had violated her rights of freedom of movement as a CARICOM citizen. And the Caribbean Court of Justice actually ruled in her favor, affirming freedom of movement within CARICOM for CARICOM citizens, unless those citizens were deemed to be, I quote, undesirable persons, or persons who may become a charge on public funds. And this raises the question of what would this ruling actually mean for Haitian citizens, given the impoverishment of most Haitians and the country's isolation from most of its Caribbean neighbors. And it also, I think, expresses a certain degree of contempt for people of the socioeconomic class who constitute the majority of Haitian migrant workers in the Dominican Republic. And it goes a long way to explaining why CARICOM, despite their outrage at the recent ruling, has really never said a single word about the situation of Haitian migrants in the Dominican Republic. So in light of all this, I want to go back then at the end of my presentation to that statement from the Tropical street vendor, that punchline, what will be left for the Haitian people, which simply may be too prescient to actually be that funny. CARICOM's Regional Reparations Committee is tasked with the job of highlighting what it calls the special case of reparations for Haiti. But the Martinique government sent no representative to the September CARICOM Reparations Committee conference. Given the current occupation of Haiti, there is a very real possibility that reparations paid to Haiti would end up lining the pockets of Western interests and anti-democratic Haitian elites who are responsible for the impoverishment of the overwhelming majority of the population. So I'm not suggesting that in engaging more consistently with Haiti, CARICOM should take some kind of moralizing, high-handed, or simplistic approach. Still, CARICOM leaders do not seem to understand that reparations are connected to the crisis of occupation in post-coup and post-earthquake Haiti, and that the situation of Haitian migrant workers and the descendants of the Dominican Republic is also an echo of this longer history of enslavement and racism that they claim to be challenging. So just in conclusion, I do think it's important in a Canadian context. Obviously, as I said, we do want to, in this context, hold the government here to account. But I think there's also a real responsibility to get a real understanding of what the regional context is here, who the potential regional partners would be, and also why it's so important that the conversation about Haiti. It's often hard for us to understand that question of why, what is the point with Haiti? And I think there are issues of resource extraction, so there are a whole range of issues. There's also a way in which Haiti is a model of the future imagined for all of the people in the region, right? It's important to recognize that part of what is sustaining the situation in Haiti is to some degree that you now have, in the early 21st century, a whole series of governments in the Caribbean, many of whom have experienced their own, shall we say, disappointments with radical political experiments, but who have completely given up on any vision of any sort of radical alternative solution. and have caved in, and do now see their own people as ultimately expendable in a global economy. And that, I think, is a broader context for understanding the